Here's a number that should make every dealer principal lean in. Only 43.9% of car buyers, yes, the ones that buy from you, actually return to your dealership for the next purchase. Yes, that's an average number, but it's a very important one to be thinking about. We're not talking the same brand, it's the same dealership. Could be yours, which means that more than half of every customer you sold last year is gone, and the dealer across town is going to sell them their next car. Reynolds & Reynolds, they did research with Cox Automotive, and they put a number on this. They put a dollar figure. 1% improvement in customer retention generates $700 million in additional annual revenue across the industry. 1%. Most of what determines whether that customer comes back doesn't happen on the lot. It happens before they ever set foot on it. I'm Sean Rains, and I'm back with you for the GoTo Connect Garage video series. And today, the most important person in the room is back. David Marcroft, he's back with us. He's the principal auto director at GoTo and the automotive subject matter expert who spends his days, probably nights too, inside the systems and the conversations that make or break this pre-visit experience in dealerships. David, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sean. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, these are great conversations. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on some of this. I want to start with that 43, almost 44% return rate. What's actually being measured here? And why does that number look like the way that it does when you, and when you're sitting with dealers and you're breaking it down, like what are they thinking? Like, is there some insight you can provide to us on this?
Yeah, definitely. It's such an interesting and important metric, and it's worth underlining, right? And just to reiterate what you mentioned there, Sean, this is dealership specific data, right? So this is not brand loyalty data. So a customer can love a Toyota or love a Nissan and you go to a different dealership because of this reason or the other. So I think what's the reason why I underline that, right, is that this is a solvable problem for the dealerships, right? They actually have some say in how that customer is retained or not retained. So I think that, first time buyer attrition is expected, right? You're not going to keep 100% of your customer base every single time they purchase a vehicle. But I think it's just about, again, those small improvements, right? You mentioned the 1% improvement and kind of the impact that has on the overall industry. The important thing there is that small improvements compound over time. We'll certainly get into more of that as we go through the discussion. But I think the other important piece of this as well is, we spend a decent amount of time talking through the sales data, which of course is very important. That's how you introduce lifetime service customers to the dealership. But the other important data point that can't be forgotten is the service side. What's your service only revenue retention, right? And how many of those service customers are receiving that compelling experience to keep them coming back for years and years?
Yeah. And service is so critical. It's always critical. We mentioned this, I think, on episode 1, and I feel like it comes up in a lot of conversations, and it will come up probably in a lot of our conversations. I don't think we can ever say it too much. It literally has always been the lifeblood of retail automotive. There's never been a more significant time for it to be considered that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I want to get your thoughts a little bit on, this Reynolds and Cox Automotive math says, about this 1% of retention equaling $700 million. Help the dealers translate that a little bit into like their own rooftop. What does that look like maybe in their store? Like you're a Toyota store or a Nissan store. That'd probably be a good example. What's that 1% look like to a Nissan store?
Yeah. So I think you're right on the money with that, Sean. That $700 million number is just so abstract that it's hard to kind of put that into context for a single dealership. So if you shrink that down to like a single store, right? Let's just say that it's a relatively average dealership, maybe a little bit on the larger side, it's doing 1,000 units a year as an example, right? And maybe it's a $45,000 average sales price, somewhere in the mid 40s, right? 1% of that, of course, is 10 customers, right? Pretty straightforward math there. But I think that the important piece to remember is those 10 customers don't just represent 10 additional sales in the future, right? Mm-hmm. They represent additional service opportunities with routine maintenance. They offer trade-in opportunities. They offer referrals to friends and family. They offer a higher average transaction value in the future because there's already trust and a relationship with the dealership. So you're talking about, yes, 10 customers strictly from the math, but from a revenue impact, there's probably 30, 40, maybe 50 different revenue touches that are associated with that group of 10 customers because of all the other services and the lifetime value of those customer relationships. So that number can compound very quickly and turn into a powerful flywheel for the business.
That's such a great point, and I don't think dealers think about that enough. Like, it isn't just 10. It's what you do with each one of the 10 and the capability and the potential of each of them. Do it right, and your point is exactly, and it lands as probably as significantly as it should for people who are maybe hearing that and thinking, "Oh my goodness, I gotta always be thinking that way." When you're having your team meeting, it's like they need to be thinking that way. That's why all these things important. And it has a
Yeah,
lot to do
and
with how today's buyer acts, you know?
yeah, no question. And unfortunately, right, the uncomfortable side of it is it works the same way in reverse, right? So if you're
Yeah.
unfortunately, right, if there is some challenges and customers aren't having an ideal customer experience when they work with your store,
Yeah.
you're losing that flywheel in terms of multiple customers that maybe walk out the back door as well.
Yeah. That's such a great point. And that also, that area, especially if they actually go online to talk about that bad experience, which
Yeah,
people are usually more inclined to do that than to say the great things about you. Um, that is AI searchability food like crazy, right?
yeah,
Not so much on, the intent of I'm trying to like find the best deal on a vehicle, to find the information about you as a dealer. That's
yeah,
really critically important. Let's talk a little bit about today's buyer. They show up to the dealership. They've done most of their research already. Um, how much of the purchase decision is actually made before they ever even pick up the phone or walk in? What does that mean for dealers that, where they should be putting their attention?
yeah. I think this is arguably the biggest shift over the last 5 to 10 years in the automotive space is the level of qualification that the customer has by the time they pick up the phone or actually call you or submit a form online or text you through your website. It's just night and day difference, right? All of the research is telling us that buyers are spending 10 to 15 hours trying to find the perfect vehicle before they ever talk to anyone, right? They know the year, make, and model. They've checked your inventory levels. They've read your reviews. They know the trim that they want. All of these things have already happened, right? Before anyone picks up the phone or answers or replies to an email. So I think that that's just such a critical, you know, piece of the puzzle that you need to understand as a dealer operator is that these customers are highly qualified and they have a really good understanding. Now, that doesn't mean that advising and providing your professional insight doesn't matter or is somehow less important. But I think it's just critical to understand that these are really highly qualified inbound leads for these phone ups. So
Mhm.
what does that actually mean, right? So how do you apply that in terms of how you decide for the business? I think what I would say to a dealer principal that's thinking about this data point is how are you shifting your focus as a business leader to the areas where your customers are making that decision, right? Because the in-store experience is extremely important, right? I'm never going to argue that it's not, but that realistically is downstream from the decision that was made earlier, which is I'm interested in this Ford dealer's F-150. So I'm going to submit my name and information, and my decision criteria and my clock starts the moment that I hit submit. So how much time am I spending on that in-store experience versus those critical 5, 10, 15 minutes after a customer says, I know what I want. How can I get it?
You're absolutely right. The experience starts before the actual walk-in visit. And I want to dig in with you a little bit more there. This is such a this question lands for me right now because I I have a daughter who is actually car shopping right now. And so every few years, somebody says, "Hey, Sean," or in this case, Dad, walk with me through this a little bit. So the
Yeah.
question relative to this experience starting before the visit to the dealership, in a real dealership, what's that experience look like? Like walk through the customer, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're feeling from the dealer before they've actually come into the dealership.
Yeah. So I think the piece of that I would really highlight is making sure your customers are feeling like customers and not leads, right?
Mm,
So what are we doing to make sure that, you know, we're enabling a buying experience, not kind of, pushing them along through one. Uh,
mhm,
so, that's a really important piece of it, and a big part of that is uh, a consolidated communications experience. What do I mean when I say that? I mean you don't get three text messages, one asking you to write a review, one asking you if you need more information on a car, and one asking you when you want to schedule a test drive. Right? It doesn't mean that you're getting three different emails from multiple different domains and service providers. So a unified experience that's very cohesive, adds value, and is not redundant or ineffective. And I think the other core piece then would of course be text, right? So I think it's no secret that text is where customer engagement is not only going, but where it is realistically today, right? Practically no customer has a zero email inbox these days. It's very difficult to get people on the phone, right? Especially with spam flagging, which is a topic in and of itself that's happened just over the last couple of years. So being able to reach your customer via text effectively and to not tie interactions to a single person is just absolute table stakes when it comes to effectively engaging your customer base in an auto sale.
mm. Yeah, for sure. We're experiencing some of these things currently. It's very interesting to have conversations about those experiences when you're actually going through them. Um, you talk to a lot of dealers, and so I want to ask you on this particular topic to stay here for a minute. Where does this break down most often? Is it the website where this kind of unified communication mindset? Is it the website? Is it in their response times? Obviously, that's an age-old topic, but still important. Speed to lead, however people want to frame it. The text reply. Is it a BDC handoff? Like, where do dealers think that they're winning when they're actually probably losing?
Yeah, I think it really is in this, again, to your point, Sean, we're not breaking any news here, but I think that the response time is the more important than the channel, right? So,
Mm,
and that comes down to visibility, right? Do you have the visibility into the channel? And do you have multiple hands in the cookie jar, for lack of a better term, right? Do you have the ability to see across multiple departments who's responding to which customer and the ability to reassign that for things like vacations and PTOs? Because ultimately, right, a 4-hour templated reply is just a slower version of silence to a customer. Like it practically does the same thing. You're not really providing, again, that personalized, second to none purchasing experience when you're not enabling that really rich, deep, insightful conversation, human to human.
mm, mhm. Next thing I want to ask you, actually, I want to put have you really put us in the customer's seat. And just for the audience, I sometimes feel like people need to be reminded, like we're all consumers too. David, he's a subject matter expert in this. He's spent hours and hours and obviously hundreds of dealers and over his whole career. And so when I say put us in the customer's seat, this is also David thinking about his own, like he's a customer too. But put us in that customer seat that you've narrowed it down to the three dealerships. The customers reaching out to all three of them. What, from your experience today, what's separating the one they pick from the two that they just decide to pass on?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an important question. And it's sometimes, in fact, most of the time, really difficult to answer for these dealerships. A lot of times they don't know why they're winning, or more importantly, why they're losing. And what the research shows us is speed is, of course, the most important thing, right? Your buying window has just continued to shrink over time. You've got purchasing decisions that are happening. And this leads back to what we talked about earlier, which is that buyers are educated when they come into the dealership. A lot of times they know what they want. So, your job is, to put it in maybe Amazon terms, how do I make it as convenient as possible for a customer to go from I want this to I have this? Right? In a lot of cases, that's your role. And then what are some additional services that we can add on to really level up that experience as well for the customer? But at the end of the day, it's about, did the customer hear from you in a timely manner? Were you the first dealer to reach out? Because that's immediately going to give you a tremendous advantage. And then was the outreach personalized, relevant, and helpful?
Silence is a message here, right? When
It
the
is.
dealer's taken 4 hours to respond to an inquiry, I mean, what do you think is going through the the buyer's mind already, and they're deciding in those 4 hours? Kind
Yeah,
of a you ask yourself that question. I mean, the things that they are actually deciding, I don't think that dealers want them to be considering that, because it has nothing to do with them. It's like literally talking themselves out of wanting to give them any consideration.
sure. Yeah, I think that silence or maybe templated responses, right? Think about yourself in the customer seat for a second. What that really communicates in a lot of cases, right? At least this is the customer's perception, is, maybe some level of disorganization, maybe a lower priority on the sales process, or that customer's priority to the business. And the lead on effect of that, right, is if this is my experience before I've paid anything or given them my money, what does that look like after?
Mhm. Yes. You said something that I usually like to be really well planned. I know exactly the things that I want to ask you in these conversations. This is a little sidebar one, but you mentioned templated communication. There's a lot of that, and there has been a lot of that in automotive. And there was a time when it made sense, because it actually was an efficiency gain for dealers that were like just kind of burying themselves in leads and like, how do we fix this and how do we get better at communicating at all? But there are so many dealers now that still have templated communication setup that's 10, 15 plus years old. They haven't changed much. Do you still see a lot of that? I mean, you clearly are talking to dealers about, the modern version of this customer experience and what they should be doing. Are you still seeing like dealers that have very aged templated systems set up?
Very much so. Yeah, it's, to your point, Sean, right? Like this is kind of how the industry worked for so long. So I think that there's a lot of that just naturally over time, you'll accumulate these technologies and then maybe they don't keep up with the buying experience. But when you think about the buying experience today, right, there's obviously been this tremendous shift since 2021. And that is, of course, ChatGPT, Gemini, all these large language models. Why does that matter? Why is that relevant? Every single person today is getting content that's relevant and personalized to them. That includes the car buying experience. That includes service recommendations. That includes everything under the sun. You put in your information, the large language model knows who you are and knows what you're interested in. So if your business isn't providing that same level of experience, you're behind. In the
Yeah.
customer's mind, you're behind. And, I think that that's an untapped opportunity for a lot of these dealerships, is how can we increase relevancy with some of these cutting edge technologies, like AI, but not always AI, right? A lot of times the answer is
Yeah.
giving our people, our excellent consultants, the tools that they
Yeah.
need to have these conversations.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think that, at least for me right now, it feels like the big win in automotive for dealers is still very much a hybrid of humans and AI. Humans that actually are allowed to learn how they can turn it into superpowers and solve problems and gain efficiency and get better and all these things, but not to, because there's also this mad dash for like everything AI, just turn it all over to AI. And I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
just if it hasn't already started to be catastrophic for dealers, I think it's just a matter of time, because when you're talking about selling things that are 30, 40, $50,000, average truck payment, like for 50% of every truck payment that's out there now today is like $1,000. People don't want the automated AI experience all the way through all that. They want like a partial thing. And it's one of the things that I think is really contributing to the success and rapid growth for you guys is I think that you see it that way. You understand all of the like angles, and I think that there's so much nuance that's necessary to understand so that you get to the right outcomes, as opposed to being all in on one or the other. And it's kind of interesting to watch. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's important. You guys are, I think, doing a really great job there.
Yeah. It's all about, of course, making the customer feel this is one of the most important decisions that they're going to make this decade. So how can we apply that to make them feel important in that interaction?
Yep. So true. All right. Take the GoTo logo off the table for a second. If you can.
Okay.
What does a connected pre-visit experience at a dealership actually look like to a buyer, regardless of who's providing the tech?
Yeah. So I think it really comes down to three core principles. Okay. And that is speed, right? So same day is not good enough anymore, right? It needs to be within minutes, right? In an ideal scenario, you should be providing communication in minutes to the customer so that they're not wondering or forgetting about something, in the moment. Number two is context, right? So is it relevant to my specific service or test drive for the reason that I'm visiting the dealership? And then single threaded communication, right? I'm able to interact with the business, even with multiple parties, multiple departments, multiple people, and it's convenient and easy for me. I don't have to jump between threads. I don't have to context switch. I don't have to change the medium of my communication based on the business's requirements. I'm able to interact in the way that's easiest for me. So I think those are the three key principles when it comes down to really enabling. Again, this is the the Four Seasons experience that we're describing here, right? And that's what the dealers that are going to own the next decade and take an unfair share of the market are going to deliver.
I love that's so concise. The speed, and I really love, like, context is so important. Unified communication is so important. You actually summarized what many years ago, and we've already mentioned this OEM in this conversation, so I'm not going to say which one it is, but many years ago, on this similar topic around speed to lead handling, essentially I was brought in by that OEM to speak to their entire field team. And you just kind of summarized in 3 points what I was trying to say then, just not quite as articulate as you just did. And it's very interesting. And you know what? When we're off the recording, I'll tell you a little bit about some of that, because the mystery shopping and the screenshotting of that back then, it would be very interesting to see if some of that lives today. I bet some of it does. But for dealers, don't miss that. Don't let the lead get buried right there. If you're like trying to figure out how to like boil that down, like what's more consequential right now? It's like, of course, speed, but we all know it. But don't get tired of something that's, like you said earlier, David, we're not breaking news on that, but it still is a place where a lot of dealers, they are asleep, or they're not staying attentive, or they've maybe allowed someone else that they trust to manage something that they're not managing it quite the way that they think that it's being managed. You got to inspect all those things, because it is very important. Context is huge. You have all kinds of people that reach out to the dealership, and the first kind of communication back to them is like, did you even pay attention to what I'm asking you? Like, are we on the same planet?
Yeah, exactly.
And cleaning up that communication profile and making that easy for the customer too. Just, they seem like very, like, of course, they're fundamental, but that's where the wins happen. All these things that are connected fundamentally, and then all the technology that could actually improve all of it will. It will, but only if
That's
you've
right.
got sound practice in place around these things that are really foundational. So love that.
No
I
question.
want to ask you, about a scenario. So a dealer principal, maybe general manager too. They're watching us have this conversation. They're watching all this going on in their store. Who owns it? Is this the BDC? When they're having those conversations, the dealer principal to the GM, or maybe it's the GM to, his leadership team. But who is it that owns all of this? Is it the BDC? Is it the general manager themselves? Is it a marketing director? Is it a GSM? Someone else in the sales organization? Who should be accountable for this pre-visit communication? All these things, making sure that speed, context, and communication is happening. Like, who is that usually by default, do you think? And
Yeah.
has that changed? I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it was, lumped in with BDC. I think sometimes sales management got involved, IT to some degree if the dealership has in-house IT, because a lot of the stuff is technology related. But really, the person that it should be, in my opinion, and who it's shifted to, based on our observation, is the GM. Right, the GM is responsible for, and pre-visit communication touches every department. Right, every single department is involved in, or should be anyway, involved in pre-visit communication and setting expectations with customers and just being available. Right. So I think that the GM is, the person that should be caring the most and overseeing a project like this, because it is their domain. Right. It is really the overall dealership operations that we're talking about. We're not talking about just sales or just service here. This is the type of technology and the type of communication that's really going to completely transform potentially the revenue of the dealership. We talked about that earlier with the 1% improvement in just the magnitude of difference that 1% can make, especially when you compound that over time. So definitely would be, in my opinion, in the GM's court.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the 1% again, because I want to swing back on that a little bit. That 1% retention bump equals, 700 million across the industry. A lot of money. For an individual dealer who's saying, well, I want to capture my share of this, what would you say, like, what's the single change you'd put in front of them? Like, do this, the one that it's the move that really kind of is going to bend that retention curve in their favor. And, maybe they can't get that, to the point where they see it trending in their favor by the end of Q3. But as they're thinking about this now, end of Q3 going into Q4, where's that single place or that kind of move you'd say that you need to be working towards?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question, and I actually love this question. I've gotten this from a few dealers that I work with, and sometimes I'll go out of my way to make this recommendation. But one of my favorite exercises is go be a customer, right? Go and create a Gmail account, or use one of your personal Gmail accounts, right? Create a fake pseudonym. Go and submit a lead on your website at 7 p.m. on a Saturday. Go and call into the dealership, or have a friend call in at a busy time. What is that experience? And how does that relate to the benchmarks that you have set for what you see as your KPIs for the dealership? So I think that's just a really powerful way, right? We're looking at dashboards, we're looking at data, we're looking at tools all day long, every day. Take 5 to 10 minutes, put yourself actually in the buyer's seat. Yeah. What would my experience be if I wanted to buy a vehicle from my own dealership?
I love that. That's such a great recommendation. I think that you should tell them they should do that once a month. That will probably be like, that's too much. Once a quarter, please. The industry is automotive retail is so dynamic that it's probably worth doing that. And when you said that, one, I'm not surprised that would be an answer for a guy like you that's been in this a long time and you are having these conversations a lot. That's a great recommendation. It reminded me of something that the author Tim Sanders said in a book many years ago, a book called Love is the Killer App. And he shared the story of, at the time, a couple of different CEOs. One of them was the Pizza Hut CEO, would randomly call customers, like literally just some single mom that's having to buy pizza 3 times a week because she's working 3 jobs? And is it you want to have to be feeding your kids pizza or no? But he would call and just, what's the story? Why you're such a great customer. You order pizza all the time. I'm literally the CEO. And I think that putting yourself in the shoes of your customer, going through that experience is the best thing to ground yourself to why you do what you do and how you may be able to improve it. So I love that recommendation. I have personally told GM friends of mine for years to do that, and also steal that page out of call 3 people who bought cars from you last month, at least 3, and just tell them, I'm the owner, I'm the GM or whatever, and say thank you. And what's your story? Just learn a little bit about them. Like, listen more than you talk to them, and your dealership will be significantly better just because of that. So great recommendation, David. Really good one.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's when we have, dealer principals and GMs that go through this exercise, it's the quickest change, right, that we can see from do I have a problem to how quickly can I fix this? And not always is there a problem, right? It's not 100% of the time, but I think that most dealerships would be surprised going through this exercise to see, is there opportunity for improvement? Most of the time, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, so true. So true. And a great place to park this one. Audience, if you took anything or just one thing from this, I think maybe think about that math, the 1%. There's a share of it that should be yours. Not 10, not 20, just 1%. The dealers who are quietly winning right now are the ones who have figured that out. That experience starts the moment the buyer types their store name into a search bar. It's not the moment that the buyer walks through your door. And that's really important. And you can't think that you've known that and that your dealership is still operating that way. You got to keep that as something that's always a fresh perspective because it matters. David, this was once again very educational. Great insights on this one. I always appreciate you dropping those. Audience, if it was useful, there's a lot more coming in the series. I think next we're going deeper on, I think it's maybe a little bit AI. We mentioned that a little bit in this episode, but I think we're going into like what AI power communications actually look like in a dealership. I think that's where we're going next. Sometimes we change our mind, but I think that's where we're going. Until then, thanks for joining us for some time in the garage. Your next sale, by the way, started a week ago. The only question is whether you're already in the conversation. We'll see you next time on the GoTo Connect Garage.
Go to where? GoTo Connect Garage. GoTo Connect Garage.